Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Recently I got a comment on a video I made 2 weeks ago about how to create a main menu with keyboard and gamepad capabilities, and it made me think about an inventory system, so today I have the solution for you. So today's video will be a little bit different, and by the way, I got a comment from Joe here that told me that there was a problem with blueprints in making a dynamic inventory system which could be scrolled with gamepad or keyboard. So today guys, I'm taking the chance to introduce you to artificial intelligence, which some of you may like, some of you don't. Personally I didn't like it at first, but now it has become really useful in the everyday life. So today I'm gonna introduce you to ChatGPT and maybe Crayon for every need you could have. For example, Crayon could make you a texture like you're seeing on the screen. You can write, generate me, for example, a stylized texture for wood planks, and yeah, you go. You have the wood planks, and it will take about 2 minutes, while ChatGPT will serve us in this video to give us a head start on how to make the inventory system work on Unreal with Blueprint. However, it will give us C++ code because it's not capable of showing us Blueprint. After a long conversation with ChatGPT, I finally got the right answer, because in Blueprint you don't have 2D arrays, so we had to use a one-dimensional array instead. And I finally made the bot understand that I could not use 2D arrays, and he finally gave me a working example of a simple system to move around in the inventory. So I can bind it to keyboard or gamepad. So enough of the talking, let's move to Unreal and let's follow the step 1, which consists in making our inventory in the UMG and create the current index variable that will be our current position in the inventory, and the width, which will correspond to the row per the item per row in the inventory. Okay, so what I have here, I already made a few blueprints. For example, I made a blank level with a create widget that will show the inventory on screen, and this is really simple. This is the basic. Then I made an inventory which consists of a canvas. Inside the canvas I put a border, and inside the border I placed a wrap box that you can find under the panel section, and it contains the inventory items. So I also made, of course, the user widget for the inventory item, which consists in a canvas, a button, and a text to differentiate the item in the inventory. So it, for example, it could be a different image for your inventory item and different name or item count. So now we need a few variables, which will be our current index, which should be a single integer, and we will need a width variable that will be an integer too, and it will be the items per row in our inventory system. So we can leave the current index to 0 by default, and we should set the width to the items per row we have in the inventory, which we'll be seeing soon in the video. So now you can handle the inputs however you want. For this specific tutorial, since I'm using Unreal Engine 5, I can use key events directly in the blueprint, or you could also use input action. For example, I made this test input action here, and it will work. Or you could use the new enhanced context mapping for your controls. So for example, you can call the enhanced input local player subsystem and add the mapping context to the blueprint, and then you could call a input actions for the mapping. So I made an example here, and we have this event that I called input, which is the equivalent of the old input action. So for example, triggered will correspond to pressed, and completed should correspond to released. So that said, I'm gonna use for this example these event input keys here, but you could also use the method in the precedent video, which consists in do an override of the on key down, and you could just follow the precedent video to do the same and add your keyboard or gamepad inputs here. So for simplicity, I'm gonna use these keys here and just move with the keyboard for today. Okay, so moving on, we now require our array. To make the array, just add a new variable, and in the context here, you will search for your inventory slot, which will be your type. So we give it a name. For example, we can call it inventory items, and we change it to array, and we save, and we can now drag what we need in the graph. So we get the reference to the array, and we get a current index and width, and then we get a set for the current index, and we can start making the logic the bot has provided us. So we already done the step 2 and probably the step 3. So we can move on and make the logic for the up, down, left, and right. So now we need to take care of the cases here. For example, for the up key, we will need to drag from the current index and subtract from the width, so we can get the subtract operator, and then we will connect it to the set current index, and we will connect it to the key, and now we will connect it to the width. And this will be our up key. Then we have the down key. We should copy the same current index and width, and this time we will do an addition instead. So we take an add operator and connect it to. Pretty easy, and the next is even easier because we will need for the left key a decrement integer. So we get a decrement operator, and we connect it to the key. And for the right key instead, we will need an increment integer instead. So we increment the int, we connect it, and we are done. And we're pretty much set. We already did 4 of the steps the bot provided us. So we save and compile. And now if you see, I have here a text on my user widget, which is bind to my current index, so I can see the change in the index. So if we save and compile and play, we will see that when I press the buttons, the index will change now. So what is the problem in this case? In this case, we have out of bounds values. So we can go to -12 or something, for example, and this is not what we really want, because we want to handle these cases. We don't want to get out of bounds. So how can we fix this? Well, ChatGPT already fixed this for us. So if we go and check the code, he already gave us outbound cases, and we can implement them on the graph. But before we continue, I forgot to tell you about the items per row. So your width should be set to your item per row. In my case, my width is 4 because I have 4 items per row. And how do you set the items per row? In the wrap box, I have 1500 as a value for a wrap size, and you should calculate yours to make your items wrap at a certain size. So in my case, I wanted 4 items per row, and the number of your items per row should match your width. So you can do the calculation to move the index up and down, and not only left or right. Okay, so as you can see now, I'm going outbound with -1, 2, 3, and 4. So now let's fix the out of bound, like I was saying. So from our array reference here, we want to start a branch, which is basically an if, and we want to add an event, which I'm going to stupidly call cases because I don't have parentheses now for the name, and I'm gonna connect it to the branch. And so we want to make a condition for our case, which will be if our current index is less than 0. So if we go out of bound, we want to set our current index. So we get a reference and we set it, and we want to set it to the length -1 of the array. And we connect it and we are done. So this is the first case. Now let's make the second. Let's copy the branch. For this case, instead we want to make a condition by always getting the current index, and we're gonna we wanna check if it's greater or equal than the array length. So if that's the case, we want to set our current index to 0 and reset it. And save and compile, and now we can connect our cases event to our keys. Now I'm gonna do it in a really blind way. You can make it better depending on your keys setup. And for the example, it will do. So save and compile, and let's test it. What will you notice now is that when I move the keys, it is going only to 0 and -1. This is because what I have now on screen is not coming from the array itself, but is just placed in the in the wrap box, sorry. So what I'm gonna do now is simulate a dynamic inventory. For this, I'm gonna use a for loop to create a bunch of items in my inventory array. So on your actual game, you might want to handle this differently, like the inventory array should be on a place like you can access it globally, for example, the player state, or if a single player game in the game instance, or even in the player controller. So now I'm going to generate 10 items with a loop. So in the loop body, I'm gonna create a new widget, and the widget will be our item inventory slot, or just our item inventory. And I'm gonna add some differentiation here. So I'm gonna expose the string I made before in the item, and I'm gonna refresh the node, and I'm gonna connect to the, let's call it item name, a random integer. So we're gonna see different type of items. So you could have different type of image, for example. And okay, once we're here, we want to add to our inventory the newly added item. So we do add, and we connect the item to the array. And what we also need to do now is, of course, add the item to screen in the actual inventory. So we get the wrap box, you're gonna expose it as a variable, and you grab it inside the graph, and you do add child. And then you can connect it to the flow. And the content should be the created widget too. So save and compile, and we, in my case, since I have a few example items, I'm gonna clear the array before doing the loop. So I'm gonna get the wrap box and do clear children. So that's pretty much it. We can now save and compile and test what is going on here. So we have 10 items, and I can move the index up to 10, and it will not go out of bounds. So far, so good. Okay, now I'm gonna switch real quick the random integer to a random integer in range, because I made a mistake. And what we need to do from here then is get a visual feedback when we are moving around the inventory. So for this, I'm going to carry a function I made in the precedent tutorial about the main menu. So if we go here, I already have it. I have a function which will be our change of state, which consists of basically a for each loop. So we are iterating our inventory. And when we iterate our inventory, we get our index, and we're gonna compare it with the current index. So I just changed the button background color in here when it's true or it's false. So if the current index corresponds to the button, let's say, in the array, it will change color. So we'll get a visual feedback of what we are selecting in the inventory. So if we test it, the item should be red. So of course we're gonna need to connect this function to our system. So if we move to the inventory, we might want to connect the function to the cases event. And now if we move, we can see the buttons are red. So we now already have our navigation in the inventory system. And this is pretty much 80% done. So you can see a few problems here, that if I go a few times down, it is not coming to the first element, but it is going to the second row directly. So to fix this, we might want to hook the function we have right now for making the button red to our cases too, because right now they are not handled. So if we move to the graph and copy really quick the function and we test it again, we're gonna see now that we are scrolling to the first row and it is working just fine. So at this point we can notice another problem. So if we go all the way to the right, it works, but if we go to the left, it skips the last item. So to fix this, we will also want to copy the function to the other case. And now if we test it again, it will work just fine. And here we are. We are 90% done now. Now, if we go back to ChatGPT, we can see that he already told us how to set a current item reference. This will be needed because we might want to add a click event to our current item, so each item will perform an action. So how do we get this working in a really simple way that does not require you to hard code every single button and every single item in the inventory? Since we have a dynamic inventory, the item we get could be anything from like a potion to a sort of armor or something. So we want a different effect when we activate the item, for example. So to do this, we might want to use this current item reference as ChatGPT has told us about. So let's move to the graph and let's see how we can handle this in blueprints instead. So to get a reference to the current item, we surely want to make a new variable to set. So let's move on the left side of the panel and let's create a variable. So the variable should be, of course, our current item, and the type we might want to be a inventory slot, which will be your inventory item, but we're gonna make it a single variable and not an array, and we're gonna set it on the graph. So then we want to get the current index of the item. So the current index will be the item we're actually on. And what we have to do from here is get the inventory item array and do a get a copy and connect to the index our current index. And we just have made our current item reference. So we connect it to the cases node, and that should be just enough to handle the current index. Now, don't mind the wiring I did in the background, it shouldn't be needed for you. Now we're gonna handle the click event, so I'm gonna use an enter event key for now, and I'm gonna print a string for testing, and I'm gonna connect my current item and get the display name, so we can see if this is actually working. So if we press enter, we are now getting the display name of the current item we are on. And if you got it right from here, we're just about to finish. So now we don't really need the help of the bot anymore. I have a nice idea for the click event. So moving to our inventory item blueprint, we can now add a custom event, which we'll call click, and we're gonna set a print string, and I'm gonna set the item value, which is the number I have on the item right now. And on the inventory, in the enter event, we are gonna instead get our current item click function, and we're just gonna call it from here. So if we save and compile now, and we try to click an item, it should print the number on the item. So for today's tutorial is everything. I'll see you in the next video. No, I'm joking, don't go. You might have noticed that, of course, it is really easy to print a string from this item because I used a mat random. Instead, if you want more items, what you have to do is creating a new blueprint class. So first I'm gonna make a folder that will be your items. So items, I'm gonna drag the item inside this, which this will be our basic class. So we want to create a blueprint class and search for our inventory slot, which will be your inventory item. And you're gonna create a blueprint of this type, which will match the type of the blueprint we already made. So you give it a name, and this item will inherit all the properties from the initial blueprint. So as you can see, the parent class is the same. And from here, you can now just move to the graph. So this will inherit all the values, for example, the count and stuff. And in the graph, you actually want to just go and call the event click that you made in the original blueprint. And here you can drag any logic for this specific item. So if this is a potion, you will, for example, heal your character. And that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna use an hello world, and as you can see now I'm getting numbers. But if I go back to the inventory here, and I change my class for the item I'm adding to an array to my new item. So as you can see, this is my new item, and I save and compile and play. Now the item is gonna print hello world. So in this way, you can add different items to your array, and they will do different actions. So from Chib is everything, guys. Thank you really much for watching. Hit the bell button, and as soon as I can, I release the projects for my Patreons on my Patreon. That is coming soon. Link in description below. Subscribe, and I'll see you soon.